The sound of slot machines echoed through the marble halls of the Belmont Grand Casino like a symphony of false hope. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the faces of gamblers who had come seeking fortune but would likely leave with empty pockets. In the heart of this glittering temple of chance, where money flowed like water and dreams died quietly at green felt tables, nobody noticed the young woman in the black cocktail uniform carrying a tray of drinks through the crowd. Her name was Sophie Barnes, and she was invisible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sophie had been working at the Belmont Grand for 7 months now, ever since she had dropped out of the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. The tuition had been too much. Her father's medical bills had piled up after his stroke, and her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep their small apartment in Queens. Sophie had been 1 semester away from graduating with a degree in classical piano performance when she made the choice to leave. Someone had to help pay the bills. Someone had to be practical. Dreams were luxuries her family could no longer afford. She moved through the casino floor with practiced efficiency, balancing her tray perfectly as she navigated between tables and tourists. Her feet ached in the required 4-inch heels. The uniform was designed to be noticed, a short black dress with sequins that caught the light, but somehow Sophie had mastered the art of being seen without being remembered. She delivered drinks with a polite smile that never reached her eyes, collected tips with a quiet thank you, and disappeared back into the background before anyone could start a conversation. The Friday night crowd was particularly thick tonight. High rollers had flown in from Dubai, Hong Kong, and Los Angeles for a private poker tournament being hosted in the Belmont's exclusive diamond room on the top floor. Sophie had heard the other waitresses gossiping about it in the break room. $50,000 buy-in. $1 million prize pool. The kind of money that could change someone's life in a single night. Sophie delivered another round of drinks to a craps table where 3 men in expensive suits were losing money with the casual indifference of people who had too much of it. They barely glanced at her as she set down their whiskeys. One of them tipped her $100 chip without looking up. Sophie pocketed it and moved on. In 7 months, she had learned that the biggest tippers were usually the ones who paid the least attention. Money meant nothing to them, so they threw it around carelessly, buying goodwill they would never remember giving. The casino manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Drummond, stopped Sophie near the roulette tables. Victoria was in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She ran the Belmont's gaming floor with military precision and had little patience for mistakes. "Sophie," Victoria said curtly. "We need someone to work the diamond room tonight. Renee called in sick and we're short-staffed. You'll get double time and 20% of whatever tips come your way. Interested?" Sophie's heart jumped. The diamond room was legendary among the casino staff. It was where the real money played, where billionaires and celebrities gambled away fortunes while drinking $1,000 bottles of wine. The tips alone from one night in the diamond room could pay Sophie's rent for 2 months. "Yes, ma'am," Sophie said quickly. "I can do it." Victoria gave her a critical once-over. "Fix your makeup first. These people expect perfection. You have 15 minutes. Diamond room, 8th floor, private elevator behind the concierge desk. Don't be late." Sophie hurried to the employee bathroom and checked her reflection in the mirror. Her blonde hair was pulled back in the required sleek ponytail. Her makeup was already flawless because she had learned early that presentation mattered in this job. She reapplied her lipstick, adjusted her uniform, and took a deep breath. This was her chance to make serious money tonight. Money her family desperately needed. Money that could help pay down her father's medical debt or give her mother a break from working doubles at the diner. She made her way to the private elevator, showed her employee badge to the security guard, and rode up to the 8th floor. The doors opened into a completely different world. Where the main casino floor was loud and chaotic and filled with desperate energy, the diamond room was quiet and elegant and controlled. The carpet was thick enough to muffle footsteps. The lighting was soft and warm. Classical music played subtly in the background, so faint you almost didn't notice it. The room itself was smaller than Sophie expected, designed to feel intimate and exclusive. There were only 4 gaming tables, each one surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than Sophie's car. Oil paintings in gold frames decorated the burgundy walls. A full bar made of imported Italian marble stood in one corner, staffed by a bartender in a white tuxedo jacket. And in the far corner of the room, positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Las Vegas Strip, sat a stunning black Steinway grand piano. Sophie stopped walking when she saw it. Her breath caught in her chest. She had not been this close to a real piano in 7 months. At the conservatory, she had practiced 4 hours a day on instruments like this. Her fingers had known every key, every pedal, every subtle variation in touch that could make a Steinway sing. Looking at it now was like seeing an old lover across a crowded room, someone you had tried to forget but never could. A hand touched her elbow, making her jump. Sophie turned to find another waitress standing beside her, a tall brunette named Alexis who had worked at the Belmont for 3 years. "First time up here?" Alexis asked with a knowing smile. Sophie nodded, still staring at the piano. "Don't even think about it," Alexis said quietly. "That piano is off limits. Mr. Chen had it brought in special for tonight. Nobody touches it except whoever he decides can play it. And trust me, nobody ever gets to play it. It's just decoration for rich people who want to pretend they appreciate culture." "Mr. Chen?" Sophie asked. Alexis gestured toward the largest poker table where 6 men sat with towers of chips in front of them. One of them stood out immediately. He was older than the others, maybe in his late 60s, with silver hair slicked back in an expensive suit that looked custom-tailored. His face was weathered and serious, the face of a man who had seen everything and been impressed by nothing. He sat perfectly still, studying his cards with the intensity of a chess master. "Lawrence Chen," Alexis whispered. "Owns half the casinos in Macau and 3 right here in Vegas. Worth about $8 billion, give or take 100 million. He comes here 4 times a year for private tournaments. Always brings that piano. Always makes some kind of bet about it. Last time he bet some oil tycoon $1 million that he couldn't find anyone in the whole casino who could play Rachmaninoff. The guy searched for 2 hours and couldn't find anybody. Mr. Chen won the bet without the piano ever making a sound." Sophie felt something twist in her chest. A Steinway grand sitting silent and unplayed was a crime against music. An instrument like that was meant to be heard, meant to fill a room with sound and emotion and beauty. Keeping it as a decoration, as a prop for a wealthy man's games, felt wrong. "Come on," Alexis said, pulling Sophie toward the service station behind the bar. "Let me show you the ropes. These guys tip in thousands, but you have to be invisible. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact unless they want it. Just be a ghost who brings drinks and disappears. Got it?" Sophie nodded and spent the next hour learning the rhythm of the diamond room. It was completely different from the main floor. Down there, everything was fast and loud and chaotic. Up here, everything moved with deliberate slowness. The poker hands took 20 minutes each as the players studied and calculated and bluffed. The drinks were sipped, not gulped. Conversations happened in low voices. Even the clink of chips sounded muted and refined. Sophie served champagne and single malt scotch and vodka so expensive it came in bottles shaped like diamonds. She cleared away empty glasses and brought fresh napkins and made herself invisible just like Alexis had instructed. The tips were extraordinary. One player handed her a $500 chip just for bringing him water with lemon. Another tipped her $1,000 after she correctly identified the year of the wine he was drinking by reading the label upside down from across the table. But Sophie kept glancing at the piano. It sat there in the corner like a beautiful ghost, silent and waiting. The overhead light caught its polished surface, making it gleam like liquid obsidian. Sophie's fingers actually ached looking at it. Muscle memory was a powerful thing. Her hands remembered the weight of the keys, the precise pressure needed for each note, the stretch required for difficult chords. 7 months away had not erased 20 years of training. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Around midnight, something shifted in the room. The poker tournament had narrowed down to 3 players. Lawrence Chen sat across from a heavy-set man in a white suit who spoke with a thick Russian accent and a younger man with styled hair and too much cologne who kept checking his phone between hands. The Russian was losing badly. His chip stack had dwindled to almost nothing while Mr. Chen's stack had grown into a mountain of black and purple chips worth thousands each. The Russian slammed his cards down on the table and pushed back his chair. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly, his accent thickening with anger. "You have all the luck tonight, Chen. All of it. There is no skill in this. Just luck." Mr. Chen's expression did not change. He calmly stacked his chips and said nothing. "I am tired of these games," the Russian continued, standing up now. His face was red with frustration and alcohol. "Every time I play with you, the same result. You win, I lose. Maybe you are cheating. Maybe this whole casino is rigged." The room went very still. The dealer's hands froze. The bartender stopped pouring. Even Alexis, standing near Sophie at the service station, drew in a sharp breath. Accusing someone of cheating in a private high-stakes game was a serious insult. People had been banned from casinos for life over less. But Mr. Chen simply smiled. It was a cold smile, the smile of a snake that has just spotted prey. "Dmitri," he said calmly. "You always complain when you lose. And you always lose because you have no discipline. You play with emotion instead of logic. That is why you will never beat me at cards." The Russian, Dmitri, pointed a thick finger at Mr. Chen. "Then let us play a different game. Not cards. Something else. Something where your cold logic means nothing." Mr. Chen leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "What do you propose?" Dmitri looked around the room, his eyes wild and searching. Then he saw the piano. "That," he said, pointing at it. "You always bring your precious piano. You make your little bets that nobody can play it. Well, I have a bet for you. I bet you cannot find anyone in this entire casino who can play real classical music on that piano. Not just play, but play it beautifully. Play it like a concert pianist. If you can find someone who can do this, I will pay you $5 million right now. But if you cannot, you pay me $5 million and we call it even for tonight." Sophie's heart started hammering in her chest. $5 million. That was more money than she could comprehend. That was generational wealth. That was every problem solved and every dream restored. Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying Dmitri with those sharp calculating eyes. "You want to bet $5 million that I cannot find someone to play piano?" "Not just play," Dmitri repeated. "Play beautifully. Like a professional. Like someone from a symphony orchestra. You have 1 hour to find this person. Anyone in the casino. Anyone at all. If they can play one classical piece perfectly, you win. If not, I win." The third player at the table, the younger man with the cologne, laughed. "This is insane. You are both insane." But Mr. Chen was smiling now, a real smile this time. "Dmitri, you have been losing all night and you are drunk. Are you sure you want to make this bet? $5 million is a lot of money to lose over pride." "I am sure," Dmitri said stubbornly. "I am very sure. You think you are so smart, so clever. You think you can buy anything with your money. But you cannot buy real talent. Real art. I do not think there is anyone in this whole casino who can play classical music the way it should be played. Everyone here is too busy chasing money to care about culture." Mr. Chen stood up slowly. He was shorter than Sophie expected, maybe 5'7", but he carried himself with the authority of someone much larger. He walked over to Dmitri and extended his hand. $5 million. 1 hour. Anyone in the casino. If they can play one classical piece beautifully, I win. If they cannot, you win. Deal? Dmitri shook his hand firmly. Deal. Mr. Chen turned to Victoria Drummond, who had been standing quietly near the door. Victoria, please make an announcement on the casino floor. I am looking for someone who can play classical piano. Professional level. $5 million prize for the person who can do this successfully. Spread the word quickly. Victoria nodded and pulled out her phone, speaking rapidly into it. Within minutes, Sophie could hear the announcement echoing through the building's speaker system, tinny and surreal. Attention all guests and employees. Casino owner Lawrence Chen is offering a $5 million prize to anyone who can perform classical piano at a professional level. Please report to the diamond room on the 8th floor immediately if interested. Sophie felt her hands start to shake. This was it. This was her moment. She could play classical piano at a professional level. She had been training for exactly this since she was 6 years old. She had performed at competitions and recitals and concerts. She had won awards. She had been good enough to get into the Manhattan Conservatory, one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. She could do this. She could win this. But doubt crept in immediately, cold and familiar. She had not played a real piano in 7 months. What if her fingers did not remember? What if the muscle memory had faded? What if she made mistakes and embarrassed herself in front of these wealthy, powerful people? What if she failed? Alexis appeared beside her, eyes wide with excitement. Did you hear that? $5 million. Someone is about to get very rich. Sophie swallowed hard. I can play, she said quietly. Alexis turned to her, confused. What? I can play classical piano, Sophie said again, louder this time. I went to music school. I studied for 15 years. I can do this. Alexis grabbed her arm. Are you serious? You can actually play? Sophie nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. Then what are you waiting for? Alexis practically shouted. Go! Tell them. That's $5 million, Sophie. But Sophie's feet would not move. Fear had frozen her in place. She looked at the piano, then at Mr. Chen, then at all the wealthy important people in the room. She looked down at her cocktail waitress uniform, at her sore feet in ridiculous heels, at her empty drink tray. Who was she to think she could do this? She was nobody. Just a girl who had dropped out of school to serve drinks to rich people. Just another failed musician in a city full of them. The elevator doors opened and people started flooding into the diamond room. Word had spread fast. There were dealers from the main floor still wearing their vests. There were security guards and bartenders and cocktail waitresses. There were guests who had abandoned their slot machines and card games to try their luck at $5 million. Everyone wanted a chance. Mr. Chen stood by the piano with his arms crossed, watching as person after person approached him claiming they could play. A middle-aged man in a Hawaiian shirt said he had taken lessons as a child. Mr. Chen gestured to the piano and told him to play. The man sat down and plunked out a halting, clumsy version of chopsticks. Mr. Chen shook his head and waved him away. A young woman in a cocktail dress identical to Sophie's claimed she had played in her high school jazz band. She sat at the piano and attempted what might have been meant as Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata but came out as a discordant mess of wrong notes and poor timing. Mr. Chen stopped her after 30 seconds. More people tried. A bartender who could only play by ear and did not know what classical music actually meant. A tourist who had learned YouTube tutorials and could play exactly one piece, for Elise, but played it so mechanically and lifeless that it sounded like a music box winding down. A security guard who had impressive finger speed but no sense of dynamics or emotion, turning Mozart into nothing more than fast notes with no soul. Sophie watched each failure with a growing sense of opportunity and terror. She could play better than any of these people. She knew she could. But what if Mr. Chen's standards were too high? What if even her best was not good enough? The announcement had said professional level. What did that mean to a billionaire who probably attended concerts at the world's finest opera houses? The hour was ticking away. People kept trying and failing. Some got further than others, but none satisfied Mr. Chen. He remained by the piano with that same neutral expression, occasionally glancing at his watch. Dmitri sat at the poker table drinking vodka and looking increasingly smug. The $5 million was starting to look like a sure thing for him. Victoria Drummond appeared beside Mr. Chen and whispered something in his ear. He nodded, then raised his voice to address the room. We have 15 minutes left. If anyone else believes they can play classical piano at a professional level, this is your last chance. Sophie felt Alexis elbow her hard in the ribs. Go, Alexis hissed. What are you afraid of? You said you can play. So play. Sophie took a step forward, then stopped. Her mouth was dry. Her hands were trembling. Everyone in the room seemed to be looking at her even though they were not. She felt exposed, vulnerable, small. What's the worst that can happen? Alexis whispered urgently. You try and fail? So what? You're still a cocktail waitress either way. But if you don't try, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what if. And if you succeed? Sophie, that's $5 million. That changes everything. Everything. Sophie thought about her father lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak clearly because of the stroke. She thought about her mother's tired eyes and calloused hands from working double shifts. She thought about her student loans and the conservatory degree she would never finish. She thought about this piano sitting silent and unplayed, a beautiful instrument wasted on people who saw it as nothing more than a prop. She thought about the moment she had decided to leave music school. How she had cried alone in her dorm room, knowing she was giving up the only thing she had ever truly loved. How she had packed up her sheet music and her metronome and her recordings of the great pianists and shoved them in a box under her bed because seeing them hurt too much. How she had walked away from everything she had worked for because being practical mattered more than following dreams. But maybe dreams mattered after all. Maybe this was the universe giving her one more chance. One moment to prove that all those years of practice had meant something. One opportunity to show that talent did not disappear just because circumstances forced you to set it aside. Sophie handed her empty drink tray to Alexis. Her hands were still shaking, but her feet were moving now, carrying her forward through the crowd. She walked toward Mr. Chen with her heart hammering and her breath coming short. People stepped aside to let her pass. She could feel their eyes on her, curious and skeptical. Mr. Chen looked up as she approached. He studied her with those sharp eyes, taking in her cocktail waitress uniform and her nervous expression. Yes? He said simply. Sophie's voice came out smaller than she intended. I can play. Mr. Chen raised one eyebrow. You are an employee here? Yes, sir, Sophie said. I work the main floor usually. But I was trained at the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. I studied classical piano for 15 years. Before I had to leave school. I can play what you were looking for. Mr. Chen looked at Victoria Drummond. Did you know we had a trained pianist working as a cocktail waitress? Victoria looked embarrassed. No, sir. Employee backgrounds are not my department. Mr. Chen turned back to Sophie. What is your name? Sophie Barnes, she said. And why did you leave music school, Miss Barnes? Sophie hesitated, then decided honesty was better than pretense. My father had a stroke. The medical bills were too high. My family needed money more than I needed a degree. So I left and found work here. Something flickered across Mr. Chen's face, an emotion Sophie could not quite read. He nodded slowly. All right, Miss Barnes. Show me what you can do. Sophie walked to the piano on legs that felt like water. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching her now. She could see Dmitri at the poker table leaning forward with interest. She could see the other employees gathered near the bar, some of them looking hopeful and some looking skeptical. She could see Mr. Chen standing with his arms crossed, waiting. Sophie sat down on the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. The Steinway was even more beautiful up close. The keys were perfectly maintained, not a scratch or smudge on them. She placed her hands on the keys without pressing down, just feeling the familiar smooth surface. Her fingers remembered this. Her body remembered this. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. What should she play? Something impressive but not too showy. Something that demonstrated technical skill but also emotional depth. Something that would prove she was not just a girl who had taken piano lessons but a real musician who understood the art. She made her decision. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, No. 2. It was one of the most beautiful pieces ever written, filled with delicate runs and rich harmonies. It required precise fingerwork and careful pedaling, and most importantly, it needed to be played with deep feeling. It was not the hardest piece in the classical repertoire, but it was one that revealed immediately whether the pianist had soul or was just hitting notes. Sophie placed her fingers on the starting position. The room held its breath. And then she began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, filling the diamond room with sound that seemed to shimmer in the air. Sophie's fingers moved to the second note, then the third, and suddenly the melody was flowing from her hands like water from a spring. The opening phrase of Chopin's Nocturne was gentle and yearning, a musical sigh that spoke of longing and remembrance. Her right hand carried the melody while her left hand provided the gentle accompaniment, rolling arpeggios that created a cushion of harmony beneath the tune. Sophie felt something unlock inside her chest. This was what she had been missing. This was the piece of herself she had buried when she walked away from music school. For 7 months she had served drinks and smiled politely and pretended that her soul was not dying a little more each day. But now, with her fingers on the keys and music pouring out of her, she felt alive again. She felt whole. Her eyes remained closed as she played. She did not need to see the keys. Her fingers knew where to go. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice guided her hands across the keyboard with perfect precision. The melody climbed higher, growing more ornate, decorated with delicate trills and grace notes that sparkled like jewels. Sophie's touch was light but controlled, coaxing beauty from the instrument rather than forcing it. In the room, people had stopped moving entirely. The bartender stood frozen with a bottle in his hand. The dealer at the empty poker table had his hands flat on the felt, not dealing, just listening. Alexis had tears running down her face, though she did not seem to notice. The tourists and employees who had come hoping to win $5 million themselves now stood transfixed, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Lawrence Chen had uncrossed his arms. He stood perfectly still, his face transformed. The cold calculating mask he wore had cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. His eyes were fixed on Sophie's hands as they danced across the keys. He had heard this piece played 1,000 times in concert halls around the world by famous pianists whose names appeared on album covers and marquees. But there was something different about hearing it played by this young woman in a cocktail waitress uniform who had set aside her dreams to pay her father's medical bills. There was an authenticity to her playing that moved beyond mere technical skill into something deeper and more profound. Dmitri had stopped drinking. He sat with his glass halfway to his lips, forgotten. His expression had gone from smug confidence to stunned disbelief. He had made his bet thinking he was making an easy $5 million. Las Vegas was full of people who claimed they could do things they could not actually do. He had assumed that anyone with real classical training would not be working in a casino serving drinks. He had been wrong. Sophie reached the middle section of the nocturne where the melody became more passionate, more urgent. Her fingers pressed harder into the keys, drawing out richer tones. The left hand grew more complex, crossing over the right hand in cascading runs that required perfect coordination. This was the section that separated amateur pianists from professionals. The technical demands increased dramatically while the emotional intensity had to remain controlled and refined. Too much force and it became harsh. Too little and it lost its impact. Sophie navigated it flawlessly. Her years at the conservatory had trained her not just to play notes but to understand the architecture of a piece, to know when to push forward and when to pull back, to feel the natural ebb and flow of the music. She let the phrase breathe, giving each note space to resonate before the next one came. The Steinway responded to her touch beautifully, its rich tones filling every corner of the room. A woman standing near the windows had begun to cry openly. She was one of the high rollers who had come for the poker tournament, a real estate developer from California worth about $40 million. She had everything money could buy, but she had not felt genuine emotion in years. Her life was transactions and deals and negotiations where everything had a price. But this music was reaching past her defenses, touching something she had forgotten existed. The beauty of it hurt in a way that felt cleansing, like lancing a wound that had been festering too long. A security guard named Marcus stood near the elevator doors. He was a former Marine who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had seen things that gave him nightmares. He kept his face carefully neutral as part of his training, but inside he was breaking apart. The music reminded him of his sister who had died when they were children. She had played piano too, not as well as this but with the same kind of love. He had not thought about her in years because thinking about her hurt too much. Now the memories were flooding back and he was grateful for them even though they made his chest ache. Victoria Drummond stood with her hand pressed against her mouth. She had worked in casinos for 30 years, rising through the ranks through sheer determination and competence. She had become hard in that time, calculating, focused on profit margins and operational efficiency. She had forgotten why she had first come to Las Vegas, drawn by the excitement and possibility and dreams of something bigger. Watching this young woman play, seeing the pure joy on Sophie's face despite everything she had sacrificed, Victoria remembered who she used to be before the world had ground her down into someone practical and pragmatic. The melody returned to its opening theme but transformed now, more complex and layered with additional ornamentation. Sophie's hands flew across the keys executing rapid passages that should have sounded frantic but instead sounded effortless and natural. This was the gift of a truly skilled pianist, making the difficult look easy, hiding all the work and training behind a facade of grace. Sophie could feel her own tears now, hot on her cheeks, but she did not stop playing. The tears were part of it, part of the emotion she was channeling through the music. She was playing for her father lying in that hospital bed. She was playing for her mother working herself to exhaustion. She was playing for herself and all the dreams she had abandoned. She was playing for every hour she had spent practicing scales and exercises when her friends were outside playing. She was playing to prove that those hours had meant something, that all that sacrifice had not been wasted. The piece was building toward its conclusion now. The melody climbed higher one last time, reaching toward something just out of grasp, something beautiful and unattainable. Then it began its descent, resolving back to the home key with a series of gentle chords that felt like a sigh of acceptance. Sophie played the final notes with infinite tenderness, each one softer than the last, until the sound faded into silence. Her hands lifted from the keys and rested in her lap. She kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, holding on to the feeling of the music before she had to return to the real world. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The last note hung in the air like a ghost before finally dissipating. Sophie opened her eyes and the spell broke. The room erupted. People were not just clapping, they were shouting and cheering. The employees were hugging each other. The high rollers who had seen everything money could buy were on their feet applauding like they were at Carnegie Hall. Marcus the security guard was wiping his eyes unashamedly. The real estate developer was sobbing into her hands. Even the stoic dealer was clapping with tears streaming down his face. Alexis was screaming, jumping up and down with her hands over her mouth. Victoria Drummond was clapping so hard her palms had to be stinging. The bartender was pounding on the bar top shouting yes yes yes. Total strangers were embracing each other, united in the shared experience of having witnessed something transcendent. Sophie sat at the piano bench in shock. She looked out at all these people applauding her and could not quite process what was happening. Just 10 minutes ago she had been invisible, a cocktail waitress nobody noticed. Now everyone in the room was looking at her with tears in their eyes and wonder on their faces. She had done this. Her music had done this. Lawrence Chin walked toward her slowly. His face was wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. When he reached the piano he stopped and looked at Sophie for a long moment. Then he did something that made the entire room gasp. He bowed to her. A deep formal bow of respect and acknowledgement. "Miss Barnes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was the most beautiful thing I have heard in 20 years. You did not just play Chopin. You understood him. You felt him. That is the difference between someone who knows music and someone who is music." Sophie could not find words. Her throat was too tight with emotion. She just nodded and more tears spilled down her cheeks. Lawrence Chin turned to face Dmitri, who still sat at the poker table looking stunned and pale. "Well, Dmitri," Mr. Chin said with a slight smile. "Do you agree that Miss Barnes played classical music at a professional level? Do you agree that I have won our bet?" Dmitri nodded slowly. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "You won. She was magnificent. I have never heard anything like that outside a concert hall. You won fairly." Mr. Chin nodded. "Then you owe me $5 million. However," he continued, raising his voice so everyone could hear, "I am going to do something different. Miss Barnes will receive the $5 million. All of it. She earned it, not me." The room erupted again. Sophie felt the world tilt sideways. $5 million. He was giving her $5 million. That was impossible. That was more money than she could comprehend. That was enough to pay every medical bill her father had. That was enough to support her mother so she could quit her jobs. That was enough to go back to school and finish her degree. That was enough to change everything. "Wait," Sophie said, her voice barely audible over the noise. She stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. "Wait, please. I cannot take that money." The room went quiet again. Everyone stared at her in disbelief. Mr. Chin tilted his head, curious. "Why not? You earned it fairly." Sophie shook her head. "The bet was between you and him. I was just the person who played. The $5 million should be yours. I cannot take money that was never meant for me." Mr. Chin studied her face carefully. "You would refuse $5 million out of principle?" Sophie nodded, even though every practical part of her brain was screaming at her to take the money. "It is not right," she said quietly. "I did not know about the bet when I played. I just wanted to play the piano. The money should go to whoever won the bet fairly." Lawrence Chin smiled, and this time it was a genuine warm smile that transformed his entire face. He looked years younger, almost boyish. "Miss Barnes, do you know why I bring this piano to my tournaments? Do you know why I make these bets?" Sophie shook her head. "Because I am searching for something," Mr. Chin said. "I am searching for someone who loves music more than they love money. Someone who would play beautifully not because of a prize but because music itself is the prize. Do you understand? You just proved to me that you are that person. You played without knowing about the $5 million. You played because you needed to play. And now when offered the money, your first instinct is to refuse it because you think it is not earned. That kind of integrity is rarer than perfect pitch or technical skill." Mr. Chin walked closer to Sophie and placed his hand on her shoulder. "The $5 million is yours. I insist. And if you refuse it as a prize, then accept it as an investment. I want to invest in your future. I want to help you finish your education. I want to see what you become when you have the resources and support you need. Will you accept it on those terms?" Sophie looked into his eyes and saw genuine kindness there. She saw someone who understood what it meant to sacrifice dreams for practical necessity. She saw someone who wanted to help not out of pity but out of respect. Her resistance crumbled. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The room exploded with applause again. Alexis ran over and grabbed Sophie in a fierce hug. People were lining up to shake her hand and congratulate her. The real estate developer pressed her business card into Sophie's palm and told her to call any time she needed anything. Marcus the security guard gave her a salute that somehow conveyed more respect than words could. Victoria Drummond pulled her aside and told her she could have any position in the casino she wanted, though she suspected Sophie would not be working there much longer. Dimitri stood up from the poker table and walked over. He looked embarrassed but also genuinely moved. "That was extraordinary," he said to Sophie in his thick accent. "I made a stupid bet because I was angry and drunk. But I am not sorry I lost. Hearing you play was worth $5 million. Maybe worth more. Thank you for reminding me that beauty still exists in this world." He shook her hand, then turned to Mr. Chen. "The money will be transferred to your account tomorrow morning. All $5 million. And I will never doubt you again, my friend." Mr. Chen nodded. "Thank you, Dimitri. And perhaps next time you lose at cards, you will accept it with grace instead of making wild bets." Dimitri laughed, a booming sound that seemed to release all the tension in the room. "Yes, perhaps. Or perhaps not. I am Russian. We are dramatic by nature." As the crowd began to disperse, people returning to their games or heading home, Mr. Chen gestured for Sophie to sit down again. She sank back onto the piano bench, her legs finally giving out. The adrenaline was wearing off and exhaustion was setting in. She felt wrung out, emotionally drained, but also strangely peaceful. "Tell me about your father," Mr. Chen said gently, pulling up a chair to sit beside her. "What happened?" Sophie found herself talking. The words poured out of her like the music had poured out earlier. She told him about her father who had been a high school English teacher, about how he had encouraged her music from the time she was tiny, driving her to lessons and competitions and recitals. She told him about the stroke that had come without warning, how one moment he was fine and the next he was on the floor unable to speak or move his right side. She told him about the hospital bills that had piled up, about the insurance that did not cover enough, about the impossible choice between her education and her family's survival. She told him about leaving the conservatory just one semester before graduation, about packing up her dorm room while her friends were preparing for their final recitals. She told him about applying for jobs in New York with no degree and no experience, about being rejected over and over. She told him about the bus ticket to Las Vegas, about thinking maybe she could find work in the casinos where they hired based on appearance rather than credentials. She told him about the last 7 months serving drinks and smiling at strangers and dying a little inside every day because she was not playing music. She told him about forgetting who she used to be, about becoming just another invisible service worker in a city full of them. She told him everything and Mr. Chen listened without interrupting, his face serious and attentive. When she finally fell silent, Mr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My daughter played piano too. Her name was Lily. She was extraordinarily talented, like you. She could have been a professional concert pianist. But I was always too busy building my business empire. I missed her recitals. I missed her competitions. I told myself I was providing for her future, giving her opportunities through my wealth. But what she needed was not money. She needed me to be there, to listen to her play, to tell her I was proud of her." Mr. Chen's voice became rough. "She died 10 years ago. Car accident. She was only 19, just finished her first year at Juilliard. After she died, I bought this piano. It was the piano she had learned on as a child. I bring it with me everywhere now, hoping to find someone who reminds me of her. Someone who has that same fire, that same passion for music. I have heard hundreds of people play over the years. But none of them had what you have. None of them played with their whole soul the way you just did." Sophie felt tears on her face again. She reached out and took Mr. Chen's hand. "I am so sorry about your daughter." Mr. Chen squeezed her hand. "Thank you. But do not be too sorry. She lived doing what she loved. That is more than most people can say. And now I have a chance to help you do the same. Consider this my way of making up for the time I did not spend with Lily. Let me be the father figure who supports your music the way I should have supported hers." Over the next hour, Mr. Chen and Sophie talked about practical matters. He gave her his private phone number and the contact information for his personal assistant. He told her the $5 million would be transferred to a bank account in her name within 48 hours. He asked her what she needed, really needed, beyond the money. Sophie thought about it carefully. "I need to finish my degree at the conservatory," she said. "I need to get back to studying with proper teachers. I need access to good pianos to practice on. I need time to focus on music without worrying about paying bills or working night shifts." Mr. Chen nodded. "Done. All of it. I will make calls tomorrow. I know the dean at Manhattan Conservatory. You will be readmitted with full scholarship for your final semester. I will arrange for a stipend so you do not need to work. I will have a piano delivered to wherever you are living." "What else?" Sophie hesitated, then said, "My father needs better care. The facility he is in now is adequate but not great. There are better places but they cost too much. Your father will have the best care available," Mr. Chen said firmly. "Send me the information and I will handle it." "What else?" "My mother," Sophie said. "She works too hard. 2 jobs, both physically demanding. She is getting older and it is wearing her down. I want her to be able to quit working if she wants, to rest, to have time for herself. Your mother will never need to work again if she chooses," Mr. Chen said. "The $5 million is enough to take care of your entire family for the rest of your lives if you are wise with it. And I will help you be wise with it. I will connect you with financial advisors who can invest it properly, make it grow, ensure you never have to worry about money again." Sophie felt overwhelmed by his generosity. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "Why me?" "Because you remind me of what matters," Mr. Chen said simply. "I have spent 40 years accumulating wealth. I own casinos and hotels and properties all over the world. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But none of it brought my daughter back. None of it fills the emptiness I feel when I remember missing her concerts because I was in a business meeting. Money is a tool, Miss Barnes. It only has value when we use it for something meaningful. Helping you pursue your music is meaningful. That makes my money worth something." They talked until almost 2 in the morning. The diamond room had emptied except for them and a few staff members cleaning up. Alexis waited patiently near the elevator, refusing to leave until she knew Sophie was okay. Victoria had authorized triple overtime for everyone who had stayed late, an unprecedented move that would become legendary among the casino employees. Finally, Mr. Chen stood up and stretched. "I must go. I have a flight to Hong Kong in the morning and I still need to pack. But we will speak soon. I want to hear about your progress at school. I want to know about your performances. Consider me a patron of the arts, or better yet, consider me family." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, but this one was different from the one he had given with his assistant's number. This one had his personal cell phone written on the back in pen. "Only 20 people in the world have this number," he said. "Now you are 21. Call me anytime, for anything. I mean that." Sophie took the card with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for giving me my life back." Mr. Chen smiled. "Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Thank you for playing for my daughter, wherever she is. I think she would have liked you very much." He bowed to her once more, then walked to the elevator. The doors closed and he was gone, leaving Sophie standing in the diamond room beside the beautiful Steinway piano that had changed her life. Alexis rushed over and grabbed her. "Oh my God," she kept saying. "Oh my God, Sophie, do you realize what just happened? You are a millionaire. A multimillionaire. You never have to work another day in your life. You can do anything you want. Anything." Sophie looked at the piano. "Can I play one more time?" she asked. Just one more piece before we go? Alexis laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. You can play for the rest of your life if you want to. You just won $5 million by playing piano. I think that officially makes you the luckiest musician who ever lived. But Sophie was not thinking about the money anymore. She was thinking about the music, about how it had felt to play after so many months of silence. She sat down at the piano one last time and placed her hands on the keys. This time she played for herself, not for a bet or an audience or a prize. She played a Debussy prelude, soft and dreamy and full of light. She played it slowly, savoring every note, remembering what it felt like to be a musician instead of a waitress. Alexis sat in one of the leather chairs and listened, her eyes closed. The cleaning staff stopped working and listened too. Victoria stood in the doorway and listened, thinking about choices and paths not taken and second chances. Even through the closed windows, somehow the music seemed to drift out into the Las Vegas night, mixing with the sounds of slot machines and traffic and humanity, a moment of beauty in a city built on luck and dreams. When Sophie finished playing, she stood up and ran her hand along the piano's smooth surface one last time. Thank you, she whispered to it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for waiting for me. Then she and Alexis took the elevator down to the main floor. As they walked through the casino toward the employee exit, people recognized Sophie. Word had spread with the speed that gossip always travels in Vegas. Dealers called out congratulations. Slot machine players applauded as she passed. Other cocktail waitresses hugged her and asked for details. Security guards gave her thumbs up. Even some of the guests who had been at other tables gambling stopped to shake her hand. Sophie felt like she was floating through a dream. This morning she had woken up in her tiny apartment in a bad neighborhood, dreading another shift of sore feet and fake smiles. Tonight she was leaving as a millionaire with her future suddenly bright and limitless. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that her mind could not fully process it. She changed out of her uniform in the employee locker room, putting on jeans and a t-shirt, pulling her hair down from the required ponytail. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Same face, same body, but something fundamental had changed. There was light in her eyes that had not been there this morning. There was hope. Alexis walked her out to the parking lot. Sophie's car was a 15-year-old Honda with a dented bumper and a passenger window that did not roll down anymore. It seemed absurd now that someone worth $5 million would drive such a car, but Sophie found herself feeling almost fond of it. This car had gotten her to work every day for 7 months. It had been reliable when everything else in her life was falling apart. Call me tomorrow, Alexis said, hugging her tightly. Actually, call me in a few hours once you have had time to process this. I want to hear everything. I want to know how you are going to spend the money. I want to know what happens next. I do not know what happens next, Sophie admitted. I cannot think that far ahead yet. Right now I just need to go home and maybe cry for a while. Happy crying. Relief crying. I do not even know what kind of crying. Any kind of crying you need, Alexis said. You earned it. She hesitated, then said, Sophie, I am so proud of you. Not because of the money. Because you were brave enough to try. Most people would have just watched and wondered what if. But you walked up to that piano and played. That took guts. Sophie hugged her friend again, then got in her car and drove home through the empty Las Vegas streets. It was almost 3 in the morning and the city was still awake, still glittering, still promising dreams to anyone desperate or foolish enough to believe. But Sophie had gotten her dream. Against all odds, in a single night, everything had changed. She pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex and sat in the car for a long moment before going inside. She thought about calling her mother, but it was too late, or too early depending on how you looked at it. The conversation she needed to have required more than a phone call anyway. She needed to see her mother's face when she told her that they were okay now, that the struggling was over, that everything was going to be all right. Sophie climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment and unlocked the door. The apartment was small and shabby, furnished with second-hand furniture and decorated with nothing because she could not afford decorations. But it was hers and it was clean, and tomorrow she could start looking for something better. Or maybe she would not. Maybe this apartment was perfect because it reminded her of where she had been, what she had survived. She took a long hot shower, washing away the smell of the casino and the exhaustion of the night. She put on comfortable pajamas and made herself a cup of tea. Then she sat on her sagging couch and finally let herself cry. She cried for her father and his struggle to recover from the stroke. She cried for her mother and all the sacrifices she had made. She cried for herself and the dreams she had thought were dead. She cried with relief and joy and disbelief and gratitude. And when the tears finally stopped, Sophie felt cleansed. She felt ready for whatever came next. She picked up her phone and opened her music app, scrolling through until she found a recording of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major performed by a famous pianist who had been dead for 30 years. She listened to it all the way through, comparing it to how she had played it tonight, analyzing the differences in interpretation and dynamics. Then she pulled out an old notebook from a box in her closet, a notebook full of practice schedules and performance notes from her conservatory days. She opened to a blank page and began to write. She wrote down goals for finishing her degree. She wrote down pieces she wanted to learn. She wrote down performance venues she dreamed of playing in someday. She wrote down everything she wanted to accomplish now that the obstacles had been removed. The sun was starting to rise when Sophie finally put down her pen. Through her window she could see the Vegas sky turning from black to purple to orange. A new day was beginning. A new life was beginning. She was still the same person she had been yesterday, but she was also completely different. She was a musician again. She had remembered who she was. Sophie drove to Queens 3 days later with a certified check for $200,000 in her purse. The money had been transferred exactly as Mr. Chen promised, all $5 million appearing in her new bank account like magic. She had spent hours with his financial advisors setting up trusts and investments, but she had insisted on keeping this amount liquid. Her mother needed to see something tangible, something real. The apartment building where she grew up looked smaller than she remembered. Cracked sidewalk, peeling paint, laundry hanging from fire escapes. Sophie climbed the familiar stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door marked 3B. Her mother answered wearing her diner uniform, about to leave for the early shift. Sophie? Her mother's face showed confusion and worry. What are you doing here? Is something wrong? Sophie stepped inside and closed the door. Mom, sit down. I need to tell you something. Her mother, Janet Barnes, was 52 but looked older. Years of hard work had carved lines into her face and turned her hair prematurely gray. She sat on the worn couch with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, bracing for bad news. I am not going back to Vegas, Sophie said. The words came out in a rush. I am going back to school. I am finishing my degree. And you are never working another double shift again. Janet frowned. Sophie, we talked about this. The conservatory is too expensive. We cannot afford it. Your father needs ongoing therapy and medications, and we are barely keeping up as it is. Sophie pulled the check from her purse and placed it in her mother's hands. This is yours. $200,000. There is more, much more, but this is for right now. For Dad's medical bills, for a better facility, for you to quit your jobs if you want. Janet stared at the check like it might bite her. Her hands started shaking. Sophie, what did you do? Where did this money come from? Sophie told her everything. The diamond room, the bet, the piano, the performance, Mr. Chen and his generosity. Janet listened with her mouth slightly open, tears streaming down her face. When Sophie finished, her mother pulled her into a fierce hug. My baby, Janet whispered. My talented, brave baby. I always knew your music was special. I always knew. They spent the morning at the hospital visiting Sophie's father. David Barnes was in a rehabilitation center in Brooklyn, slowly regaining speech and movement on his right side. When Sophie told him the news, he cried. The words came out halting and slurred, but the meaning was clear. He was proud of her. He had always been proud of her. Sophie returned to the Manhattan Conservatory 2 weeks later. The dean himself met with her, apologizing for the bureaucratic difficulties that had prevented her from continuing when she first left. Mr. Chen had indeed made calls. Sophie was readmitted immediately with all her previous credits intact and a full scholarship covering her final semester. She would graduate in May, right on schedule as if the 7-month detour had never happened. Her new apartment was in the Upper West Side, a beautiful one-bedroom with hardwood floors and tall windows that let in incredible light. A Steinway baby grand piano arrived the day she moved in, a gift from Mr. Chen with a note that simply said, "Play often. Play joyfully." Sophie threw herself into her studies with renewed passion. She practiced 6 hours a day, making up for lost time. Her professors noticed the change in her playing immediately. There was a depth to her interpretations now that had not been there before. Life experience had matured her artistry. Suffering had given her something to say through the music. She performed her senior recital in April to a packed auditorium. Her mother sat in the front row with tears of joy streaming down her face. Mr. Chen flew in from Singapore specifically for the event, sitting quietly in the back row. When Sophie played the Chopin nocturne that had changed her life, the audience sat in absolute silence, mesmerized. After graduation, opportunities came flooding in. David Chen, the talent agent who had been in the Diamond Room that night, officially signed her as a client. He booked her for performances at corporate events and private parties, each one paying more than she used to make in a month as a waitress. She played at a fundraiser for children's hospitals where her performance helped raise $3 million. She played at a wedding where the bride cried through the entire ceremony because the music was so moving. But the opportunity that meant the most came in September. The New York Philharmonic invited her to perform as a featured soloist in their Young Artists Showcase at Lincoln Center. Sophie would play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with full orchestral accompaniment. It was the kind of debut most classical pianists spent their entire careers working toward. The night of the performance, Sophie stood backstage in a floor-length emerald gown, her heart pounding with familiar nerves. But this time the nerves were different. They were the good kind, the kind that came from excitement rather than desperation. She was not playing to survive anymore. She was playing because this was what she was meant to do. Mr. Chen came backstage before the performance. He looked distinguished in a tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. "I wanted to give you something," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "This belonged to my daughter Lily. She wore it at her last performance before she died. I would be honored if you would wear it tonight." Inside the box was a delicate gold necklace with a small treble clef pendant studded with diamonds. Sophie's eyes filled with tears as Mr. Chen fastened it around her neck. "I will play for her tonight," Sophie promised. "I will make you both proud." The conductor gave her the signal. Sophie walked out onto the stage to thunderous applause. The concert hall was enormous, over 2,000 seats all filled with people who had come to hear music. The orchestra sat ready, instruments gleaming under the lights. The piano waited center stage, glossy and perfect. Sophie sat at the bench and adjusted her position. She looked out at the audience and found her mother in the third row, beaming with pride. She found Mr. Chen a few rows back, his face already emotional. She found her former professors from the conservatory, her friends, her agent, all the people who believed in her. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra began the opening measures, building toward the moment when the piano would enter. Sophie closed her eyes and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss and the struggle, the night she walked into that diamond room not knowing it would change everything, the music that had saved her when she had nothing else. Her hands came down on the keys and she began to play. The concerto was explosive and passionate, technically demanding and emotionally exhausting. It required every skill she possessed, every hour she had spent practicing, every lesson she had learned. But Sophie was ready. More than ready. She was exactly where she belonged. The music soared through the concert hall, piano and orchestra weaving together in complex harmonies. Sophie's fingers flew across the keys, executing impossible runs and delicate passages with equal mastery. She played with her entire body, swaying with the music, feeling every note in her bones. This was not just a performance. This was a declaration. This was proof that dreams deferred were not dreams denied. The audience was transfixed. People sat forward in their seats, barely breathing. In the upper balcony, a young girl who had just started piano lessons watched with stars in her eyes, dreaming of the day she might sit at that piano. In the orchestra pit, the musicians played with extra intensity, inspired by Sophie's passion. On stage, the conductor smiled to himself, recognizing the birth of something extraordinary. The concerto built toward its climactic ending, the orchestra swelling to fortissimo as Sophie's hands pounded out the final thunderous chords. The last note rang out, powerful and definitive, and then silence fell for one perfect moment. Then the audience exploded. They leapt to their feet as one, applauding and cheering. The ovation went on for 5 minutes, then 10. Sophie stood and bowed, tears streaming freely down her face. The conductor hugged her. The orchestra members tapped their bows against their music stands in the traditional gesture of respect. Flowers were brought to the stage, dozens of bouquets from admirers. Sophie looked out at the standing ovation and thought about the girl she had been a year ago, serving drinks in a casino and believing her dreams were dead. That girl would not have believed this moment was possible. But she had been wrong. As long as you had breath in your body and music in your soul, anything was possible. After the performance, Sophie stood in the lobby accepting congratulations. Her mother hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. Mr. Chen kissed her on both cheeks European style, his eyes wet with tears. "This is what Lily would have become," he said quietly. "Thank you for letting me see it through you." Critics from major publications came to interview her. A recording contract was offered on the spot by a representative from Deutsche Grammophon. A prestigious summer music festival in Austria invited her to perform. Lincoln Center asked her to return for a full solo recital the following season. Everything was happening at once, the career she had dreamed of unfolding faster than she could have imagined. But the moment that mattered most came when a young woman approached her shyly. She was maybe 19, wearing a student ID badge from a local community college. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you. I read about your story, about how you had to leave music school and work in a casino. I am in the same situation right now. I had to drop out to help my family. I thought I would never play seriously again. But watching you tonight, hearing your story, it gave me hope. Maybe it is not too late for me either." Sophie took the girl's hands in hers. "It is never too late," she said firmly. "Never. Keep playing, even if it is just on a keyboard in your bedroom. Keep the music alive inside you. You never know when your moment will come, but you have to be ready when it does." The girl nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away clutching her program like a precious artifact. Sophie watched her go and felt something settle in her chest. This was why she played. Not for the applause or the money or the fame. She played so that girl would keep playing. She played so that music would continue, passed from generation to generation like a sacred flame. Sophie Barnes went home that night exhausted but fulfilled. She sat at her piano in her apartment, still wearing the emerald gown and Lily's necklace. She played quietly, just for herself, a simple melody her father used to hum when she was little. Outside her window, New York City glittered with possibility. Somewhere in those buildings were other struggling artists, other people with deferred dreams, other souls searching for their moment. Sophie hoped they would find it, just as she had found hers. Because in the end, that was what the music taught you. That beauty could emerge from struggle. That hope could survive despair. That one moment of courage could change everything. That the things you loved never truly left you, even when circumstances forced you to set them aside. She had been a cocktail waitress who served drinks to people who barely saw her. Now she was a concert pianist whose name would appear on marquees and album covers. The transformation seemed impossible, but it had happened one note at a time, one choice at a time, one brave moment at a time. Sophie closed the piano lid gently and stood up. Tomorrow she would start preparing for her next performance. Tomorrow she would practice and improve and push herself toward greater heights. But tonight, she would simply be grateful. Grateful for the music that had saved her. Grateful for the people who believed in her. Grateful for the courage to walk into that diamond room and play. The Steinway sat silent now, waiting for tomorrow's music. But its presence filled the apartment with promise, a constant reminder that as long as there were pianos in the world and people brave enough to play them, magic could happen. Dreams could come true. Lives could change with a single perfect note. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.